My wife's mom used to say that she had champagne tastes in a beer pocketbook, and I can relate to that. I like buying nice things, but I don't necessarily like spending more money. If you also like a little luxury, then Quince is a good solution for luxury essentials at affordable prices. Quince offers a range of high quality items at prices within reach, like 100% Mongolian cashmere sweaters from $50. I'm hearing good things about them from my friends, so mine is on order. So I'll tell you about that when it comes. The best part, all Quince items are priced 50 to 80% less than similar brands. By partnering directly with factories, Quince cuts out the cost of the middleman and passes the savings on to us. And Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes. And I love that. Give yourself the luxury you deserve with Quince. Go to quince.com/traveler for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/traveler to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/traveler. And thanks to Quince for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I see you looking at me.
Can I have your attention, please? Yes, hi, Wanda Sykes here. You ever think about all the nicknames we have for breasts? Boobs, tatas, the girls, chesticles, bubbies. Heck, you might even have your own nickname for them. And yet, even though they get so much attention, they're still so ignored when it matters most. What's up with that? Well, on February 9th, tune in to see why I'm talking so much about breasts and visit yourattentionplease.com to learn more.
Amateur Traveler, episode 932. Today, Amateur Traveler talks about camels and pearl diving, malls and desert, forts and the tallest building in the world as we go to Dubai and the United Arab Emirates. This is Chris Christensen from Amateur Traveler. Let's talk about the UAE. There's no guest on this episode. I'll be talking about my recent travels in Dubai and the UAE. And if you're interested in other information, this is the third show we have done on the United Arab Emirates. And I'd say the one that I used the most for my travels was episode 646 from 2019, where I interviewed Carrie Hedrick, who lives in the UAE. And we sometimes do episodes like that with someone who is an expert in the destination. I love to do those sorts of shows. And Carrie will tell you more places to do than I was able to fit into a one-week itinerary. And so the advantage of her show is you get someone who has more depth of knowledge on that particular area than I do. The advantage of my show is that this is going to be updated information, and also will deal with how much I could really fit into a one-week itinerary in the UAE. But first, before we get there, I wasn't planning on doing this show because I wasn't planning on going to the UAE, going to Dubai, until I had an unexpected email. I got an unexpected email just about 3-4 weeks ago from someone at United Airlines that said they were fans of the show, and they really wanted me to have the opportunity to talk about their Polaris business class international travel as a solo traveler. And to do that, I needed to fly in Polaris business class as a solo international traveler. Where in the world did I want to go? I want to talk about that first, and then we'll get into what I did in Dubai and the rest of the UAE, because I did get to all 7 Emirates while I was there. So this is one of those wonderful opportunities that occasionally happens when you have a travel podcast. I have flown United a lot. It's the only airline that I have status with right now, and I think it's the only airline that I've ever had status with. But I tend to fly in the back of the plane. I have flown business class before, but I don't know that I've flown business class in United before, or in their Polaris business class, which is their current branding for that class. And one of the things that I did is I looked at all the different places where United flew internationally. And this is direct on United, as we'd say in the industry, metal. So this is not just on United partners. Because part of the story in this deal is I had to be flying on a on a plane that had United livery, that had United branding on it, and therefore had their Polaris class. And they fly to a lot of international destinations. Their main international airports, I learned, are Newark, San Francisco, and Houston. So I looked at all sorts of different international flights to figure out where I wanted to go. A lot of them out of Newark were sort of too close for me to experience business class. I didn't want to go up to Toronto or Ottawa or Montreal or down to the Dominican Republic or Jamaica or Panama or Costa Rica or Aruba, El Salvador, those sorts of places that weren't that far. They were under 7 hours. I could go to Europe, Heathrow, Charles de Gaulle, Zurich, Netherlands, Athens, and more. But I decided that I wanted to do one of these long flights where you knew that if you were back in coach, you would be really, really wanting to be up in business class. And so that kind of left a lot of the Asian destinations, Japan, Beijing, Hong Kong. And then Dubai stood out for me as looking at that because I was needing to do this flight in January, and January seemed like an ideal time to go to Dubai. And it turns out it was. The weather there was wonderful this time of year. It was in the 70s Fahrenheit. So lovely time of year to go there. So in terms of what I was looking forward to with business class travel was the lie flat seat, because I had a over 12-hour flight getting there and actually over 15 hours getting back. And part of that is they've had to reroute to not fly over Ukraine for obvious reasons right now. So it was going to be a long flight. So I knew that I could sleep better on a plane if I could lie flat. What I didn't necessarily anticipate was the total experience of the business class. And it doesn't start on the plane, it starts in the Polaris class lounge. So in Newark Airport, which is again their primary international hub up in the Northeast, there are 2 United club lounges. One is Polaris only and the other one is for everybody else. And as you walk in there, you have buffet that is available for you. You have a bar that is open. You have a restaurant that is sit down. You can get a shower, which I took advantage of on my flight back, which was a wonderful, wonderful experience to fly for 15 hours, stop in the lounge for an hour, take a shower, and feel like a human being again. They even have places where you can take an hour-long nap. They have rooms that are available, and when you're busy, you can only take an hour. If they're not as busy, maybe a little longer than that, as well as lots of places you can plug in your devices, food and drink, and all of that is included in the cost. The club lounge experience was wonderful because I was flying out of New York after a conference, and by the time I checked out of my hotel in the morning, I was trying to hang out in the lobby, and it was a very busy lobby, and I couldn't get internet access anymore. And it's like, let me just go to the airport and I'll hang out in the lounge. So I was in the lounge for hours, both coming and going. And please excuse my voice, I did come back with a cold. And so the lounge experience was just a little oasis of calm in the Newark airport. But then you get on the plane, and as I said, you've got the lie flat seat. So you have a seat that has a number of controls, and the major control for it is, do you want to be sitting up or do you want to have any level of reclining, including all the way flat? There were 2 different types of pillows, one a kind of big fluffy pillow, one more of a foam pillow, which worked well for me between my knees, which I sleep on my side, and that's helpful to have that. There were 2 different blankets. I ended up only using one of them, one big fluffy blanket. There was a little compartment, including a mirror so you could see into it, that had a overnight kit, basically. And the overnight international kit had the things you'd expect. Well, I don't know if you'd expect them or not. Socks and eye shade, as well as a toothbrush and lip balm and moisturizer and things like that in it. And then you also had your screen with all the entertainment, same entertainment in the front of the plane as the back of the plane, but your screen was far enough away that I had to really kind of sit up to change it, which also meant when I pulled out my laptop to get any work done, there's actually room to use a laptop. You don't have to worry about anybody reclining into your space. So the thing that I knew that I would like was that lie flat, and I did, especially on the way back with that 15-hour flight, got a lot of sleep. My concern there was that I would get too much sleep and throw myself off. It ended up working out okay. But the other thing that I sort of didn't anticipate, because I don't fly in business class that often, is how much just the elbow room. It wasn't even just that I had no one in front of me that was, leaning back into me, but that I wasn't fighting for an armrest. And really, as a solo traveler, I get very introverted and in my space. And it was nice to just have this space that was mine. And if you're on one of these planes, what a frequent flyer told me is that the odd rows have a little more space than the even rows. And so take a look at that, or take a look at seatguru.com as you're booking into the Polaris class, because they're a little more offset from the aisle, because every other seat is either on the left or the right hand side, so that you can fit in all of these seats and everybody has enough room. Wonderful experience, terrific service. On the way back, my flight left at 2:15 a.m. from Dubai, and I think the reason for that is it gets so darn hot in Dubai in the summertime that you would have a lot less lift if you took off during the daylight. So a lot of their flights are in the middle of the night. I suspect that's why, although I don't know for sure. Anybody who knows, do let me know whether there's another reason for that. But that meant I was hanging out in Dubai. It wasn't the Polaris Lounge, it was the Emirates Lounge, which my ticket also gave me access to, until almost 2 o'clock in the morning. And so when I got on the flight, I just went to sleep for 4 hours and didn't bother having my dinner until later on. And later on was able to talk to the flight attendant, and it wasn't a problem having my dinner at any time. It did mean that since I went to sleep first, ice cream was no longer available as one of the desserts. That had all melted by the time that I woke up and had my dinner. That was not a problem. The baked dessert that I had was lovely. And of course, you're eating on real cutlery. You're eating actual, what feels like real food. You can pre-order your food ahead of time. I had the beef coming one way and the chicken going back the other way. Fresh salads, cheese plates. Do you want the champagne? Do you want the wine? That's all, of course, included. But also just a wonderful level of service. There were 50 different pods in the business class, and I think 4 different flight attendants at any time who were serving the people in the business class. And so it was a lovely level of service in terms of very proactive service. I'm not one of those people who likes to ring the call button because that just feels rude, but I didn't really have to. The flight attendants would come by and see if I wanted that extra cup of tea or if I was ready for dinner or breakfast or whatever was going on. But a wonderful experience. Thanks to United for giving me the opportunity to do that. And now let's talk about Dubai. So I flew into Dubai and then did a chance, as I said, to visit all 7 Arab Emirates. And the Arab Emirates, as we've talked about on the show before, are 7 different kingdoms, as it were. They all have emirs rather than kings, and they have different laws, but then act as a federated country. So you get an Emirati passport at this point if you were from there, rather than a Dubai passport. But there are differences between the different Emirates. The largest of them and the richest of them is Abu Dhabi. Dubai, the city of Dubai stretches forever, but the Emirate of Dubai is not as big as Abu Dhabi. A very, very modern emirate, as you are no doubt aware, with with the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world, and lots of beach resorts and things like that. And then there are 5 other emirates, which I'll talk about in a little bit. So my itinerary was I flew into Dubai, and the first day I went down to the Dubai Creek. And everything I say we've talked about on the show before, but I want to go into a little more detail. The Dubai Creek is some of the oldest parts of Dubai, and this is where Dubai grew up. If you had gone about the year of my birth, 1960, to the United Arab Emirates, you wouldn't have seen the skyscrapers and things that you see today. You would have seen more fishing villages and pearl diving. You wouldn't see nearly the population you see today. 90% of the population of the Emirates are foreign workers. And so it is not uncommon to have a trip like I did, where you spend a lot of time doing tours and things like that and don't meet anybody who is Emirati. As a tourist, it's not as likely you're going to run into them, except maybe as officials at the customs desk as you're coming in the airport or something like that. I stayed relatively close to the creek at a hotel at the Arabian Courtyard Hotel and Spa for the first couple nights. So it was just maybe a 5 minute walk down from the creek. And you walk through an old market if you kind of walk down to the left there. It felt at times like I was in India because a lot of the people I was seeing were from subcontinent. They were Indian or they were Pakistani. All the drivers I had on all the tours were Pakistani. You're only a 2 hour flight from Pakistan at this point. And of course, Pakistan being Muslim country, you'll get a lot of foreign workers from there as well as from elsewhere in the world. But this particular market also had a Hindu temple in it. And so it really looked like a little slice of India as I went down to the creek. There are different boats that cross the creek to connect the two different sides. On the north side of the creek are the gold market and the spice market, which are popular with tourists as well. And then Carrie, in the show that we did before on UAE, mentioned there was a new shopping area on the south side of the creek, and that is the Al Seef, Seef market. And that is really funny because it's made to look like an old traditional set of buildings from the Emirates. There are, for instance, as you walk into this market, these square wind towers, and I had a chance to see them elsewhere in the Emirates that were historic, and these were built to catch the wind and bring it down into the building to cool it off in those hot summer days. I'm told that they'll cool off a building by as much as 10 degrees Celsius, which would be really helpful in the summertime when it gets really, really hot. But these buildings are not historic. I was there in 2025 and they're about 8 years old, and just made to look old. It kind of reminded me of the Universal Studios Cairo set in the stunt show. Buildings made to look old, but obviously very new. And so I have a picture, for instance, of these two square wind towers. What you don't see is that I cropped the picture, and just to the right is a Pete's Coffee. And so this is a tourist area, good for shopping, but it isn't a traditional market. I did a walking tour while I was down there, and the walking tour was very interesting because it was really focused on the culture of the Emiratis. Now, one of the things that's odd is I had multiple different tours talking about Emirati culture, none of them with Emiratis. None of them with somebody who is an Emirati, all of them with someone from somewhere else. So my guide on this particular tour was Abdallah, and Abdallah was from Sudan. But he was wearing a traditional Emirati robe for men's garment and talked a bit about how men and women dress. And obviously in Dubai, there's a great variety of how you'll see Muslim women dressing, from all the way up to the complete abaya and the head covering and the veil to very Western dress. But the traditional dress would be a black abaya that doesn't reveal anything in terms of the shape of the woman underneath, and then the head covering, but not these days the veil, although that was more traditional maybe 100 years ago. And then the men are similarly covered up except for a veil. I mean, their head is covered with a white cloth, the name of which I forget, with then two black elastic rings that keep it on your head, but also could be used to hobble your camel if you were wanting to leave your camel and didn't want it to wander off. And they would traditionally wear white in the summertime, and then I was there in winter where they may wear more off-white browns or grays out of tradition, but not particularly out of any religious reasons. And so both men and women tended to be fairly covered in a traditional garb.
This episode is sponsored by the Tourist Office of Spain. We have done many episodes on Amateur Traveler on Spain, and I suspect we will do many more because there is so much to see in Spain. Personally, I've enjoyed the Roman ruins, the aqueduct in Segovia, or the mosaics of Italica. I've driven the white towns of Andalusia, Los Pueblos Blancos, been in a cave in Andalusia with 10,000-year-old cave art, enjoyed the works of the architect Gaudí in Barcelona, and sat in the Plaza Mayor in Madrid. I've enjoyed less touristed places like Girona in Catalonia or Jaén in Andalusia. I was in Spain twice last year, both in San Sebastian and Bilbao, and also in Mallorca, and I still have a lot to see. How about you? Have you seen La Mezquita in Cordoba or looked down from the walls of the Alhambra in Granada? Maybe 2025 is the year you need to either get to Spain or get back to Spain. For more information, go to spain.info, which is the official site of the Tourist Office of Spain. And thanks to the Tourist Office of Spain for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
Welcome to the White Lotus in Thailand, Kat.
It's a wellness centre.
You should get a facial. The lady in the airport thought you were my dad.
My God.
The Emmy Award-winning HBO original series returns.
There has been more crime on the island. I'm a little freaked out.
What happens in Thailand stays in Thailand. Oh, what does that mean?
It means we're not dead yet. Amen.
Amen.
A new season of the HBO original series The White Lotus premieres February 16th at 9 p.m. on Max.
And we went over to the Sheikh Mohammed Center for Emirati Culture, which is right near that new market. And that is a traditional house. And there they both displayed some of the traditional garments. So the Emirati men, for instance, are unique among the men in the Middle East, where they have a tassel that is about a foot long that comes down from their collar, and more of a triangular shape yoke on the garment. But also, we were able to see that the house, for instance, had two different doors. It had a front door for men and it had a door for women, because there are two different living rooms, so that the man of the house could be entertaining men while the woman of the house is entertaining women. And of course, the men aren't supposed to mix with the women, and so they're coming in a different door into that public space. As we mentioned in that last episode on the UAE, you can also go to a meal and a presentation at the Sheikh Mohammed Center for Emirati Culture as well. I didn't choose to do that, having been there already and visited it as part of this guided tour. And then the guided tour, we took the boat across the creek. The crossing is very simple. You basically get on the boat and hand cash to the boatman as you cross over on these tiny boats. There are 3 different lines, red, green, and blue. Each of them has a canopy with the color of that light. So as you look across, you can tell where red is going to go, where blue and green are going to go. And I think it was 1 dirham, which is about a third of $1 to cross the creek. So fairly cheap, maybe about $1, but it was somewhere in that range to cross the creek. And on the other side of the creek, as I mentioned, you'll find both the spice market, the spice souk, as well as the gold market. The spice souk is more of a traditional spice market where you'll see all of the different spices laid out. Very good for photographers. If you're a photographer, you definitely want to go to the spice market. And the gold market is just very interesting because all sorts of amazing, elaborate gold costumes, especially obviously for women, and some of them quite ornate and quite large, like they would cover the whole front of her abaya, for instance. Well, of course, you would wear it underneath that. It would only be seen by your husband, I would assume, and family members. And there are no guards around the gold souk because Dubai has a very low crime rate. And of course, if you commit a crime in Dubai, not only do you get prosecuted, but you also lose your visa if you're a foreign worker and get kicked out of the country. If you buy gold in the gold souk, which I did not, you can also have it taken and assayed for free to make sure that the 18 karat gold you bought is 18 karat gold. And if it isn't, then that shop owner is going to have his shop closed. And if it's a foreign worker, he is also going to be kicked out of the country. So a safe place to go to buy your gold. I'm not sure that it's a cheap place to go. Dubai is, of course, about more luxury travel experiences. And as you're eating meals in restaurants, there's sort of 2 different classes of restaurants. If you're eating with the foreign worker, you're paying maybe $10 a meal, and it's easily doubled that if you're eating in a tourist area. $20, $30 per person per meal, depending on what kind of restaurant you're eating at. So different levels of cost depending on what you're doing. So that was my first day. My second day, I went up into the Burj Khalifa, which is the tallest building in the world. It was a great experience in terms of being up at the top there, great views. Interesting to see that Dubai is like high rises and apartment buildings, not for the Emirati. If you're an Emirati and you get married, the government will give you a piece of land and $300,000 loan with no interest to build a house. So the apartments that you're seeing tend to be for foreigners or for foreign workers. the more elaborate ones for foreigners, not for foreign workers, who tend not to make as much money. And so there's more men in the country than women because a lot of the foreign workers can't afford to bring their families. But in the Burj Khalifa, great views, although fairly hazy when I was there, with it looked like blowing sand was coloring the color of the sky. Getting into the Burj Khalifa, there's a trick to it, because I was having lunch in the Dubai Mall, which I had been told was the biggest mall in the world, but that is incorrect. It is no more than 7th, according to what I see. And I booked myself a ticket for the Burj Khalifa, and it's in the wintertime. It wasn't that busy, so I was able to book it about a half hour out, figuring that I'm right here. It's right next door to the Dubai Mall. It won't take me that long to get there. I was late because I went out and went to the Burj Khalifa, and you can't get in from the building. You have to get in from the Dubai Mall, where I started. And there are no signs on the floor that I was on for the Burj Khalifa. You have to go down to the bottom level. When you're in the bottom level, then you'll see signs for how to get in the entrance. And I think the line seemed to be fairly typical based on the signage that I was seeing. And it was about an hour to get in. So it felt a little like waiting for the Rise of the Resistance in Walt Disney World. Quite a long line. There were some videos that were playing in portions of the line of Tom Cruise climbing the Burj Khalifa, of other events that were happening there that were playing on a loop, but no place to sit down. So by the time you get up, you're a foot weary, especially if you add in the 45 minutes of wandering around aimlessly that I did. It doesn't take as long to get down because you can't have that many people up on the floor, the 124th floor, where you're seeing things from. Very interesting. The elevator to get up there takes 60 seconds. And so 124 floors in 60 seconds is quite a clip. And as you're in the elevator going up, there are LCDs along the sides, and you are seeing a presentation about the Burj Khalifa, and then eventually you're going into outer space. You'll have to go look at my Instagram or my TikTok, and those are linked from the Amateur Traveler site to see these videos. But it's very interesting presentation that keeps you very busy and keeps you from thinking about how high I'm going up. Good views from there. I would have done more that day, but I was fighting a little bit of Delhi belly. But that's a good day to explore the downtown. I got there on the metro, and the metro did turn out to be a great way to get around. I did not choose to drive in the UAE this trip, in part because I was traveling solo, and I find that I'm more comfortable driving in a foreign country when I've got another pair of eyes. In terms of the driving style, I would say I have seen worse driving in parts of the U.S. It's probably about the same as driving on the Long Island Expressway. If people are following their lanes, they were good at stopping for pedestrians, they were following all the signals, so it didn't feel like I was driving in the subcontinent. But they were following too closely, a little more use of the horn that I would like, but a little more aggressive, but not like driving in a lot of places in the developing world. I talked to one of the Pakistani drivers about how hard was it for him to go from driving in Pakistan to driving in Dubai, and he said it was very, very different. In Pakistan, he didn't even have a license. He'd been driving for years, but you don't bother to get a license. And here he had to go through not just a driving test, but he had to go through driving courses and then the driving test, not just the written test, but also the practical test of where you get in the car and somebody watches you drive. I found when I was on various tours that they had instructed their drivers to drive a little less aggressively. You weren't allowed to use your horn, for instance, if you're driving for this particular trip. They were still following a little too closely for my taste in terms of stopping distances and things like that. But it wasn't bad. But I did get around on the metro, and the metro is very easy. You buy your card, you top up your card, and if you're going only within one zone, it's only about 5 dirham, which is like $1.50 or so. So it wasn't that expensive, fairly easy. Did get crowded at times, especially during the start of the day and the end of the day. There are carriages for women and children if you want to go into one of those carriages if you're a woman. And then you can also double the price of that and stay in the gold carriage, which is a little less crowded. And honestly, it might be worth it. You'd be paying something like $3 a trip instead of $1.50 a trip and have a little more space. I also got around an Uber. Uber worked fairly well. From the airport, it was a little different because you had to get into a queue and then you had to show the Uber driver your code that it gave you rather than the Uber driver looking for a particular person. But follow the signs or ask directions. In the UAE, people speak English readily, and people were very helpful in terms of giving me directions whenever I got lost or when I was looking for the Uber stand or things like that. So the second day I would have done more in the downtown area, or I would have gone down to some of the beaches if I hadn't been feeling a little bit under the weather. The third day, I took advantage of one of the things that Carrie had suggested, which was going up to the Musandam Peninsula. And so this is the northern part of the UAE, and then a little further, there's an enclave of Oman that is just north of Arak Ras Al Khaimah, which is the northernmost, the top of the tent is what that stands for, of the Emirates. And so you can take a boat ride up into this.
She described it as fjords.
I don't think I would go that far, but it reminded me a lot of the topography of Baja California in Mexico, which is very rugged, very barren mountains that come right down into the ocean. Now, I would say that this particular tour is more of a fun tour than a cultural tour. You're not going to get a guide who is telling you all about Oman or all about the Musandam Peninsula or anything like that while you're on this tour. You're going to get more swimming, snorkeling, not great snorkeling in terms of visibility or fishing from the boat, going out in a jet boat or going out in the banana boat where you're sitting on an inflatable boat. They're dragging along behind the jet boat, intending to make turns fast enough to make you fall off the boat. It's that kind of a fun experience rather than a cultural experience. It's similar to in Dubai, you can go out in the desert on a cultural experience as I did, and we'll talk about that later, but you can also go out on the dune bashing where you're just going out on four-wheel drive vehicles or on ATVs or something like that, and it's just a fun experience. This is more like that except on water. But it was interesting. It did get me to another country, which is Oman. You do have to bring your passport. You do have to go through passport control. There is a delay there at the border. Oddly enough, I ended up on a boat where our guide spoke English and Russian, and on the deck I was on, everybody was Russian speaking, except for three of us who were getting our instructions in English, me and a couple from Korea. But one of those moments that I just love in terms of traveling is when that couple from Xi'an, China, is having their baby held by the couple from Korea with whom they have very few words in common so that they can go out on the banana boat. And people are nice. Most people in the world just really want to help. And this was just one of those great moments that made me smile. The next day I went down to Abu Dhabi. Then there were two different options I thought of as I considered going down to Abu Dhabi. One is you can take an Abu Dhabi tour from Dubai. Again, if you're not going to just rent your car and drive down there, which would be a good option for Abu Dhabi probably. But you could take a tour, for instance, and then you would decide, did you want to go to the Emirates Tower and to the Great Mosque down there, or did you want to go to the Louvre and the mosque? And you'd usually get some combination of that in the tours that are available. I wasn't as interested in doing either of those. I've been to the Louvre in Paris, and I've been to a number of different mosques, so I didn't feel the need for that. And I wanted to see more of downtown Abu Dhabi. I wanted to see the Corniche, which is the lovely coastline, and it is a beautiful beach area with a beautiful path along the shore. Great place to rent a bike or a scooter or something and explore that. I was just walking down there, but I took the bus down. It's about 25 dirham, and again, it's a 3.5 dirham to the dollar, so it's about a third of that in terms of dollars getting down there. I took the Route 100, which goes from the Al Ghubaiba bus station to the Abu Dhabi Central bus station. There's also a route that goes from the Ibn Battuta bus station. But in either case, with the buses and the metro in Dubai, they use the same card. And so you just tap onto this card both coming and going, and it takes money off of your ticket. You can top up your ticket to make sure that you have enough before you go or when you return. So this works on this in Abu Dhabi because it's a Dubai bus. Abu Dhabi has a completely different system with different cards. And the journey takes about 2 hours by bus, so they're not right next to each other.
My main goal in Abu Dhabi was just to do some walking around and exploring, and then I wanted to get down to the old fort, which has some of Abu Dhabi's history in a free museum there.
And I did get there, but unfortunately it was closed for a festival that was going on, and the festival was only in the evenings. It would have been interesting, actually. The festival, I could see that they had set up more historic, this is the way we lived in the desert, Bedouin camp sort of things that you could walk through, and they had food booths and those sort of things, but it wasn't available while I was down there. So I didn't get a chance to do that, although I went to something similar later on in my trip. But the Corniche, very beautiful. Abu Dhabi, a little smaller than Dubai, but that main part of Abu Dhabi, which is on an island, is smaller than Dubai. Yeah, I see the city of Dubai has a population of 3.4 million, and the city of Abu Dhabi has a population of 1.8 million, although the Emirate of Abu Dhabi is larger. So didn't get to see quite as much in Abu Dhabi as I was hoping to. They are far apart, and you do need to decide what you're going to want to see if you want to see either Abu Dhabi, the city, or even more of the Emirate. The one other thing that I did not see on this trip that I would love to see, the one UNESCO World Heritage Site that they have in the UAE is Al Ain, which is in the Emirate of Abu Dhabi. And that is a desert oasis town with long history. But the last 2 days, I was able to do 2 different tours that really did get into the culture and history of the UAE. The first one was sponsored for me by the Dubai Tourism Agency. That was the only sponsorship I had from them on this particular trip, and that was one that we had mentioned on the last episode, and that is the Platinum Heritage Tour. And the Platinum Heritage is a name of a company, and what they're doing is a desert experience, but not the dune bashing desert experience. In fact, they're trying to do an eco-friendly experience, and dune bashing is specifically not, because some of the desert animals hide in those dunes during the day, and so as you're doing dune bashing, you may be killing them. So they don't do that. But with that experience, we got picked up from the hotel in a Land Rover and went out, and the first thing we did is we transferred to another Land Rover, an old style Land Rover, relatively beaten up because it's been doing a lot of time in the desert. And we put on our head coverings as if we were locals, although my guide there, who was from Pakistan again, not an Emirati, was trying to convince me that the traditional headgear of men in the UAE was red and white check, which does not appear to be true. That is from Saudi Arabia or Jordan, as I had learned from my other guide who was not from the UAE. But we put on our headgear, we got our free water bottles, and then we went off into the desert, and specifically into an ecological preserve. And so in the ecological preserve, we were able to see some oryx, although at a distance. Unfortunately, you couldn't just drive anywhere you wanted to because it is a preserve. You had to stay on certain roads. I say roads, these are all just sand. And so we could see the oryx, which is the national animal of the UAE, with a white animal with long horns in the distance, but didn't get that close, unfortunately, to them. We did get to see 2 different types of gazelle, the Arabian gazelle, both the mountain gazelle and the sand gazelle, and then owls and some other birds as well as we went through the desert, and also learned a little bit more about different plants and how the plants would be used by the Bedouins. For instance, this plant was used to freshen up as soap, and this plant was used medicinally.
Hi there, I'm Lale Arakoglu, host of Women Who Travel. At the start of this year, I spoke to my friends and colleagues at Condé Nast Traveller, Megan Spurrell and Artie Menon, who've masterminded a bumper list of where to travel in 2025. It was fascinating to hear the places they're excited about, like Kodiak Island in Alaska.
The thing that I'm really excited about is the native-owned Kodiak Brown Bear Center. And if you stay in one of their lovely cottages, there's the opportunity to share space with the largest subspecies of brown bear in the world. And this both terrifies me and makes me all warm and tingly inside. In 2025, there's going to be like Banya-style steam baths and saunas and whatnot.
So you can come face to face with a bear and then go to your steam bath to
If I come face to
Process
face
what
with a bear,
happened that
I
day.
better get a steam bath
or,
after.
or share the steam bath with a bear. I mean, stranger things have happened.
Join me on Women Who Travel for more adventures wherever you get your podcasts.
So we did that drive for a while, and then at sunset, so we started this tour at 3 o'clock. I forgot to say that. And then at sunset, we were seeing a falcon presentation, which was fascinating because they were flying a falcon. And so this was a tradition in the UAE. Falcons are not native to this area. It's way too hot for them in the summer, but they would fly through in their migration patterns. And so what would happen in the beginning of the winter, you would go out and you would capture a falcon. You would get it to attack a lure, and then you would capture it. And then you would train it over the course of 3 to 4 weeks and then use it for hunting for that winter season. And at the end of winter, you would let it go because it couldn't survive the summer. And they still have falconry in the UAE. It's a big deal. And they will fly their falcons first class to different places to hunt with them. But nowadays, they keep them in air-conditioned buildings, and so they keep them longer than that. But it was fascinating to learn about how you have to make sure that the falcon is fed a certain amount, but not too much. If it's too hungry, it will leave. If it's too full, it doesn't need you anymore and will leave. And you need to make sure that it doesn't eat the lure that you are using, but instead that you are giving it food, because its relationship with you is not deep. It is all food-based. It is transactional. So, but fascinating to see these falcons fly and going after this lure that somebody is whipping around on their head on a cord. The other thing we saw, I forgot to say as we were going out there, is we passed by a number of camel farms and camel racing tracks, as their camel racing is still a big deal in the UAE, as well as the camel beauty contest, which we mentioned previously. The male camels are entered in the camel beauty contest, and the female camels are the racers, which is interesting. After our falcon presentation, we went to a desert camp. They broke us up into different camps, and we had a chance to do a little camel ride just around in a circle, which is always corny but fun.
If you haven't done a camel ride, it is an interesting experience, especially how the camel gets up and down and tilts way forward because it will bring its back legs up first, for instance, and you would nearly fall off going forwards.
I've done that before, but still did it, so for the picture opportunity, if nothing else. And then they served us a traditional meal, the kind of meal where they would take a lamb and traditionally bury it under the sand with coals for 24 hours. They don't do it in that fashion anymore, with the various types of rice and fruit for dessert and things like that. Lovely meal, wonderful meal. And as well as a presentation of 2 different types of dancing, the traditional dancing with guns, which they do, although they don't use real guns anymore at this presentation, and then the other dancing with the drums, where we were encouraged to get up and participate. You could also have had your henna tattoo there, and then there was a presentation on the stars and how they would use them for navigation, because they're doing most of their traveling as Bedouins at night, especially in the summertime, and so you'd need to use star navigation. And then the last day of my trip, I did another tour, and this was a little more expensive tour. I got it off of Viator, and it was a trip to all the 5 other Emirates. And so I had been to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, and this was to take me to all the different Emirates and focus on the history and culture of those Emirates. And so we got in the car, fair amount of driving that day. We started in Fujairah, which is up to the north, right next to Oman. And Fujairah is smaller. It does have some high-rises, but not nearly as extensive as Dubai. A little more quiet place to go. There is a small airport up there, although I don't know how many international flights it does. And one of the things we did is we went to a fort there. And the fort in Fujairah dates from the 1500s. And I should say the guide you have on this trip is more driver than guide. The kind of interactions you would have is, this is a really, really old fort. Oh, how old is it? Well, it's really, really old. So you weren't besieged with a lot of facts, so it's useful to know them before you go. But this fort just reminded me of something out of a French Foreign Legion film. not a very large fort. I expected to find Beau Geste there. And for those of you who don't know, that's an old film about the French Foreign Legion. It's been remade a couple times, but probably not in the last 40, 50 years. So you'll have to look on Netflix for that one. Also in Fujairah, but we didn't stop there, is a very large mosque that looks very Ottoman in style. It looks like it could be the twin to the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. We stopped at Umbrella Beach in Fujairah, which is a beach with some big plastic umbrellas, not out there in the beach itself, but just along the shore as decorations. The beach itself is not so fancy, not like the Abu Dhabi beach where they brought in white sand from somewhere else. It's more of a mud-colored sand beach, and it's very shallow, but it's surrounded by a number of restaurants and coffee shops. They love their Arabic coffee there, so it would be a very nice place to hang out for a while. And then the Emirates are not contiguous. There are pieces of different Emirates in different places, and so our next stop was in Sharjah, but we would drive from Fujairah to Sharjah to Fujairah again. And in Sharjah, we went up to an old tower where we had a view of the area, and then went down to one of the oldest known mosques from the 1400s, probably the oldest active mosque in the UAE. They did recently find the ruins of one from, I think, the 11th century. A little tiny mosque, but very historically significant. And then drove past a waterfall, which is an artificial waterfall. And so this is a very Dubai thing, but you're actually in Sharjah, I think, at this point, or maybe you're back in Fujairah. And the top row of this waterfall is a restaurant. And so if you're in the restaurant, you see all this cascading water out the windows, going over the windows. And right near there is a amphitheater cultural presentation facility. And then we drove up to RAK, or Ras Al Khaimah, which is the northernmost of the Emirates, as I mentioned. We had lunch there at a restaurant called Eat and Drink, and it's a group of restaurants from an Indian expat who came in and founded this restaurant. And to tell you a little bit about the foreign workers and where they come from, the cuisine at this restaurant includes Lebanese, Arabic, Chinese, Indian, Pakistani, and South Indian cuisine.
Very popular chain of restaurants with over 50 now, but I found that diversity interesting and indicative of the culture in the UAE.
And then one of the reasons we went to RAK, or Ras Al Khaimah, is that this is the oldest part of the Emirates, or where you can see some of the oldest history. And there is a cultural heritage park there that has a number of old buildings, including houses, some of whom that are just in ruins and some of that have been recreated. And this was an old pearl diving / fishing village. And again, that is the cultural heritage of this area. And you can see it probably the best place in terms of how the people lived at that cultural site in Ras Al Khaimah.
And we went down to the next emirate, which is Ajman, Ajman. And in Ajman, there's a really terrific museum and an old fort there. This is the Ajman Museum.
And so you could go to this old fort in the Cultural Heritage District. You'll see some of the history of the region very well presented, including audio-visual. The video only had Arabic and no subtitles, but you could walk into a Bedouin camp inside one of the rooms, or you could learn about the history of the pearl diving there and how it got started and how it worked. You could go up into the bedroom of the sheikh, and this is somebody who lived in the 1800s, and they look straight out of Lawrence of Arabia in terms of the dress. Or you could go and learn about the history of the police there. And they decided they needed a police force not until 1967. And so you would realize how new a country the UAE is when you walk in there and they're like, hey, yeah, maybe we need police. And the original 1967 police, again, look like they're straight out of Lawrence of Arabia. And of course, then, that morphs into the more modern police uniform. But then you would go into the next room and see pottery from 5,000 years ago. So a real combination of people have been here for a long time, but a lot of that was the Bedouin people. And so even though you can find just ancient places, especially Al Ain, which I didn't get to, in the UAE, it is still a fairly new country, and it's both at the same time. But again, I would highly recommend that museum. It doesn't take that long to get through. I think we were there for maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, but just very well presented.
We drove through Al Quwain, and my apologies for the pronunciation, but my guide told me there's really not much to see there. It's mostly empty space and warehouses.
Then we went down to Sharjah, and as we mentioned previously, Sharjah is the most conservative of the Emirates, and we had to rearrange our trip because we were there on a Friday, and we normally stop first at the Museum of Islam in Sharjah, but we couldn't stop there in the markets until 3 p.m. in the afternoon on Friday because they would be closed in Sharjah. And so we did that at the end of the trip. The Museum of Islam, and the first part of that really is describing what Islam is and the pillars of Islam and such. Not a lot of new information for me there, but if you didn't know a lot about it, would highly recommend it. And then they had models of mosques from all over the world and how they looked very different. That was interesting. Been to some of those famous mosques. But then across the way, there was a presentation about science and what the contributions of Muslim scientists had been. And that was, I thought, very interesting, worth seeing. Again, not as a huge museum in size, but it didn't take that long to go through, and it's right down there on the shore in Sharjah. Sharjah, I was told by my guide, is a much cheaper place to live and to stay than Dubai, but the transportation in between Sharjah and Dubai, when they're very close, you'd have to take a bus, an Uber, or drive between the two. And then we went both to another gold market there, again, similar to the Dubai gold market, although this one didn't feel like it had that many tourists there, just selling gold to the local Emiratis. And then to the traditional market there where you can get your abaya, the woman's garb, for, maybe $3 is probably the starting price for an abaya, and cheap tennis shoes and things like that. A very practical market where the locals would shop. I thought it was very interesting sometimes how the things that the locals needed or the things the guest workers needed, like an abaya, would be the same price as a Diet Coke at a tourist restaurant. So almost like two different economies going on at the same time. But fascinating place, Dubai in particular, but the UAE in general, worth visiting. Again, what they're targeting their tourism for is not really what I usually like to visit for. It's really targeting towards the luxury beach experience, and the nightclubs and things like that is what Dubai is targeting. And that doesn't really describe me as a traveler, but I did enjoy my visit to the UAE, enjoyed seeing more of the culture of the place. And again, the one thing I really missed out that I would love to get back to is El Ain. So if I do get back to Dubai, that would probably be top on my list of places to go. The kind of questions I usually ask my guests: I'm standing in the prettiest spot. Where am I standing and what am I looking at? One of the interesting things as we went down to that desert journey that I forgot to mention is way off in the distance. We were going down later in the day, but you could see this almost piece of fire that was hanging low in the sky, and it was the top of a solar power facility where they had mirrors that would shine up into this tower, almost setting it on fire. And you could certainly see the amount of energy that was there. That was a beautiful sight, but I would say that in general, the desert there on that trip at dusk was quite beautiful. And I enjoyed that visit for the most beautiful spot. Or it might be going up to the Musandam Peninsula and just the starkness of the landscape up there. Not quite sure. One thing that made me laugh, so I did have to laugh at two things. One is, and you will run into this, if you're on a tour and you're having people explain to you the Emirati culture, but you're getting it interpreted through someone from Pakistan or Sudan, and the two different guides that you had yesterday and today are completely disagreeing with it, and you're just wondering what to trust. So the one guide is telling you, the Emiratis always wear the red and white checked head garment, and you're like, yeah, I've seen billboards of the emirs, and they never wear that. They're always wearing the white with a black band, which the guide from Pakistan told me was definitely Saudi Arabian and not Emirati. Don't think so. So that is just as funny. And then the other thing that was funny in probably an unintentional way, I mentioned the restaurant that we went to that was founded by an Indian gentleman that had all the different types of things. That was eat and drink. One of the things they had on the wall was a plaque that they had been given as the most improved restaurant for food safety in 2011. And I don't know about you, but it made me laugh because I thought, if I got most improved in food safety, I'm not sure I would show it on the wall. That basically says you don't want to ask about what happened in 2010. But it did make me laugh. And if I had to summarize Dubai and the UAE in 3 words, desert. It is just desert everywhere. Even as you go up in the Burj Khalifa and you're looking down at all of this development, there's still just portions of that city that are just sand. And a lot of it, the red sand. Oh, I didn't say that earlier when we were out on the Platinum Heritage Tour. Our guide had one of those name tags that was magnetic. And he just took his name tag and took it apart so that the magnet was showing and put it in the red sand and waved it around for a while and picked it back up, and you could see the black flecks of iron oxide that were in that sand. So interesting. So desert, skyscrapers, and multicultural. Because it's just such a funny country that a lot of the culture of Dubai and the UAE is its non-UAE-ness. It's its non-Emiratis. It is the Pakistanis. It is the Sudanese. It is the guest worker from Indonesia. A very, very multicultural place. I did learn that the hard way at one of the places that I went where the locals were eating, and I mean the guest workers are eating, and did I want it hot? And I said yes in my arrogance, because in California, when someone asks you, do you want your food spicy? I say yes. I forgot I was 2 hours away from India, and that was a level of hot I was not ready for. And so multicultural would be my third one. So that's my experience with Dubai and the UAE. Thanks to United Airlines for sponsoring my travel and the one tour that Dubai Tourism sponsored for me. And I think that wraps it up.
My thanks to the patrons of the show who help support Amateur Traveler financially. If you're interested in supporting the show and or getting an ad-free version of the show, go to patreon.com/amateurtraveler. Also, thanks to the sponsors who help support the show. I got an email from Rick who I responded to, but I thought other people might have the same kind of comments, so I would respond to it on the air. Rick says, I liked your podcast better when it was not longer than 40 minutes and with photos. And let me address those in the opposite order. Though with photos, yeah, I'm afraid they're not coming back. I've addressed it on the show before, but it was just a lot of work. And especially as this became my main job, it was actually costing me thousands of dollars a month in lost revenue to do it with the photos. And so few people were able to see them. It was getting harder and harder. Fewer applications were supporting the chapters. So I don't see it coming back anytime soon. In terms of liking the show better when it's not longer than 40 minutes, sorry, because I do know that the show has been getting longer. And part of the reason for that is some really wonderful guests who have so much to say, who have a lot of information about the different destinations we're talking about. So I try and basically wrap up whenever we are out of information, and I really try and wrap up around an hour. If I really don't want to go longer than that. It just gets a lot harder to edit, for one thing. I edit out from the final version of the show all the times that I tell the guest, well, let's do a time check here. We're 20 minutes in and we've only covered day 1 of your itinerary. But you're right, the shows are getting a little bit longer, and I think the last 3 shows went over an hour. And that seems to be a trend, and I just don't want to cut off the wonderful guests. Sorry. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have a comment, send an email to chris2x@gmail.com like Rick did, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.